welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. Delighted, as always, to be with you, bringing you another author interview. As we get started, I do want to remind you to please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you're either listening to or watching this episode on. As I keep saying, it does help the algorithm, gets the podcast out to more readers such as yourselves. If you want to help in a monetary fashion, you can do so by going to gsmcpodcast.net. There you can leave us a tip. Anything helps. It helps to get this podcast out again to more readers. It helps not only this podcast, but the network as a whole. And all of that support that you give, no matter what form that support comes in, is greatly appreciated. Always has been and will continue to be so, because this podcast does not work without you, the readers, the listeners, the viewers, etc. So thank you as always for your support. And once again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net if you're interested in leaving a tip and supporting the podcast in that fashion. So how is your week going so far? It is Tuesday. I am confused about the day. I don't know why. Not as bad as last week when I was a day off the entire week. This week I at least mostly know what day it is, but this week feels like it's going incredibly fast and incredibly slow at the same time, and I'm not sure why that is. I think it's just because I have a very busy week this week, a busy schedule, and then some other things. We've got a friend in town. My husband's friend from California is here, and so they are trying to coordinate what we're going to do and when, and it's always nice to see him. We had a nice weekend, but again, a busy weekend for me. But it culminated in dinner with some friends of ours, more friends from California, but who now live here as well. And they invited us to dinner on Sunday, excuse me. See, day off. And it was just really nice to go and socialize and have a lovely meal with some very nice friends that we met. They actually moved not that long before we did, and we just randomly happened to meet them one day when we were out exploring, and they were from Northern California. We came from Northern California. They just moved. We just moved. It was very cool and a very big coincidence. So that was fun to have dinner with them and catch up a little bit on Sunday night. And they gave me a somewhat belated birthday present. Belated birthday presents are awesome because it just means your celebration continues, right? They gave me socks. Have I ever talked about my love of socks on the podcast? I'm sure I have. I'm sure I've talked about everything in the 10 years that I've been doing this. It might be 10 years. I need to look that up. They gave me dog socks with lots of dogs on them. And then they gave me very appropriate Portuguese socks that have pastel de nata on them. If you don't know what that is, it's a dessert. It's like some people call them egg tarts or egg custards. But they're about that round, and they have a pastry shell and then egg yolk kind of custard inside. I don't know if custard is exactly the right word, but they're one of the more famous foods that you get in Portugal. So now I have socks with them on it, and this makes me incredibly happy. But something else that makes me happy is books and talking to authors. And I am here today to talk to author Melora Fern about her book, Whistling Women and Crowing Hens. You see the cover there next to me. Let me go ahead and give you the description of this book. To escape her straight-laced, overbearing sister, Birdie Stauffer auditions for the all-female versatile quintet, Chautauqua Circuit's opening act. Through this train-traveling roadshow, she experiences the tumultuous 1920s, a modern era of shocking flappers and smuggled whiskey, with the camaraderie of newfound friends. Her exceptional gift of concert whistling entertains more than songbirds, as she gains national notoriety, and she's soon entangled in two romantic relationships, one with a dapper circuit manager, the other with her fellow pianist. Accompanied by four other musicians, a slang-slinging flapper, a confident girl next door, a tight-lipped loner, and a virtuoso sapphic, and following a series of traumatic events, Birdie discovers even the best relationships can be filled with misunderstandings. As she learns to trust her intuition, she finds it may cost her love interests, her sister, and maybe even herself. So that is the description of Whistling Women and Crowing Hens. This is, as you heard, historical fiction. It takes place in the 1920s. Maybe the 1920s as a little bit different than what you're thinking, because often when we think of the 1920s, we think of the big things. We think of flappers, we think of prohibition, we think of speakeasies, we think of a lot of kind of big, bold events of that time. And yes, those are important and they were happening, but not everyone experienced the 20s in the same way. And we meet Birdie, and she is not a flapper. She might want to dress differently. She's actually just wanting to drop the waist of her dresses a little bit. She doesn't need the full-on flapper look. She just wants her sister to allow her to dress a little bit more modern. So we're experiencing this through 19-year-old Birdie's eyes as she travels. And so we're seeing this Chautauqua circuit, which I was interested to learn about. We're seeing the 20s through maybe a different lens than you're used to seeing. And we're seeing it all through the eyes of a 19-year-old who wants more than what she's experiencing. She lives with her sister and brother-in-law, and she is feeling just very, if not smothered, she wants more freedom. And she and her sister have very different outlooks, but her sister takes her role as caregiver very, very seriously, wants what's best for Birdie, but they don't always agree on what's best and how Birdie should get it. But she does agree to let Birdie audition. Birdie is given a part in the versatile quintet. She plays trombone and she does bird whistles, which is not something that, again, I'd ever really thought much about it. I know people whistle. I know there are professional whistlers. It was fun to explore that angle as well through Birdie's character. Let's go ahead and let Melora talk more about this book and why it came about, because it came about for a very specific reason. Again, the book is Whistling Women and Crowing Hens. The author is Melora Fern. Hi, Melora. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I am delighted to be here.
I'm delighted to have you here, and I'm excited to talk about Whistling Women and Crowing Hens, which I can see behind you.
Yes.
But before we do
my
that,
visual.
it's perfect. Before we do that, if you would take just a few minutes to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Okay. My pen name is Melora Fern, and that's my first and middle name.
Okay.
And I currently live in Eastern North Carolina in a little town called Hillsborough. And I call myself a recovering CPA, meaning I used to be an accountant. That was my college degree and my career for quite a while. And I didn't get into writing until my mid 50s. Um, so I'm a newer author, definitely a debut author and a newer writer, but I love it. It just fills my soul writing. Always been an avid reader, but just didn't think I could be a writer, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So that's me in a nutshell.
Okay. It's fun though. You use different parts of your brain for numbers and writing, I would imagine. So it's fun to
Yes.
kind of explore both of those avenues.
Yep, very true. And I think like I use spreadsheets where some other authors might not use a spreadsheet for that just because it's
I
the way
love
my brain
spreadsheets.
thinks. Yeah.
That's awesome.
But we have to do what works for us,
Yeah,
right?
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Can you give an overview of Whistling Women and Crowing Hens?
Okay. Um, it's a historical fiction set in the tumultuous 1920s, and it's about a young woman who is escaping her overbearing older sister. And the way she does it is to join a traveling road show called the Chautauqua Circuit. And it turns out that she's a perfect pitch concert or professional whistler. And so she's part of a troupe of five women, and it's all about how they traveled throughout United States and Canada, giving their performances and building friendship, having adventures, and it's really about her finding her voice.
Hmm.
So kind of a coming of age, but a lot of things happen in the story.
Yeah. What was your initial inspiration for the story?
So my mom had Alzheimer's, and we were moving her to a assisted living, and we couldn't visit her for the first week. And so the way my dad dealt with that was to have me help clean out their apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And I found this box of family mementos from my mom, and it was all mostly about her mother, Verna Kurtz Lambert. And it turns out she was a concert whistler. She had perfect pitch, and she traveled with Chautauqua. And I had never seen, in the box was tons of photographs, a little scrapbook, a whistling textbook, brochures about the Chautauqua, and I'd never heard of any of it.
Yeah.
So it really sparked my interest. And I tried to write my grandmother's story, but I just couldn't because I didn't have enough about her. And my mom, wasn't at a point where she could share anything. So
Mm-hmm.
the characters just kind of appeared in my head because I used to walk my dog every evening, and I just felt like I had to tell their story. And I wrote a really, really bad first few chapters, flat characters, not
Yeah.
much of a plot. And I thought, you know what, I can do better than this. So I found some workshops to go to and just kept honing it. And I took a lot of online creative writing classes and joined a writer's critique group. And it took me about 8 years. I kept rewriting, editing, revising.
Yeah.
And it just became a better writer. And I got my manuscript to the point where I thought, I'd love to try to get this published. And I tried for about 8 to 9 months querying agents and just pretty much, I didn't get a lot of rejections. I just never heard anything from any of them.
Ooh.
Even ones that I had pitched to in person that, seemed excited in person and asked for more pages, but then just never heard from them. So I kind of re-evaluated and I thought, I just want people to be able to read this story. I'm okay if it's not, if I'm not represented by an agent and not published with one of the big five.
Mm-hmm.
So I started querying small presses and I got 2 responses immediately. And got to choose between 2 and was running around my house all excited.
I don't blame you.
The publishing industry is just a whole different animal and it constantly is changing. But I went with Sibline Press, which is a woman-owned publisher, which I thought was really good. And they only publish women.
Mm-hmm.
And, I just thought, this is a story about women and friendship and a woman finding her voice. So I'm really glad I went with them. I love my cover. I feel like it represents my book really well. One of the owners is an artist and I believe very talented.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the cover. I always like listening to authors describe how they decide how they're going to publish, the process of, are they going to self-publish? Are they going to do a hybrid publishing? Are they going to try to publish with one of the big five, etc.? And I think from what Melora was just saying, it's good to explore a lot of different options because you never know what might work and where those options might take you. And it also might not happen in exactly the time frame that you want. And it's always good to hear stories from authors who have experience and how long did it take and what did they do and how did they make their decisions and why did they make the decisions that they did. And so hearing Melora's story is another aspect, another example of how things might not happen in the time that you were expecting, but maybe they happen in the time that they need to. We're going to go ahead and take our first break of this episode. When we come back, we're talking more about why she wrote this book because of finding out about her grandmother's life and writing this book as a way of honoring her grandmother. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to work, cause my boss is a jerk, and I'm not even that paid. I need a change in my life, cause I don't feel alive, and there's nothing that makes me happy. hold my beer for a minute. I'm about to quit my job, cash in for a ticket. I'm going on a trip and I don't plan to visit. I'm gonna stay there till I feel like I'm winning. Oh, and this is just the beginning. I need a big change, help me feel like living. I need a big swing, home runs I'm hitting, and I'll never look back, moving on till I get it all. And we all got dreams, we all want things, but what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be? And do you believe you can do anything?
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Melora Fern. As we get into this second segment, this is your second and final reminder that you can help the podcast and network out by going to gsmcpodcast.net. There you can leave us a tip of some sort, of any sort, and it is greatly appreciated if that is something that you feel compelled or able to do. It's just another way of supporting the podcast, and that support, as always, is greatly appreciated. Once again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. Before the break, Melora was talking about the process of getting this book published. First, it took quite a long time to write. I think she said 8 years to finally get it written to where she was ready to have it published, and then the process of getting it published. And just always interesting for me to hear that process and how people go about that. But let's go ahead and return now to the conversation with Melora. In some ways, it's kind of sad that you found this out about your grandmother too late to be able to ask more questions or to know more, but still a wonderful way to honor her. And
Right. Yeah, I feel because very much of the story is authentic, very much of it's true, which is so interesting about historical fiction. Really, the fiction is just the characters, but the setting in Westchester, Pennsylvania, my grandmother lived there, the professional whistling, the Chautauqua circuits, all the towns each chapter is a different town where they go on the train, and they're all real towns that Chautauqua circuits went to. So I think it is cool that it can honor her, and I've got many nods to her and my mom in there, but I also am staying as true and authentic to what the history really was as well.
Yeah. So I'd never heard of the Chautauqua circuit. I'm imagining probably many people have not. Can you talk a little bit more about what they did and why they existed?
So it was a big movement that was at the turn of the century between the 18th and 19th centuries, all over America and up into Canada. And it started as a Sunday school teaching space in upstate New York, and it's still there. It's called the Chautauqua Institute. And it's a travel destination. A lot of families go there, and over the summer, each week they focus on a different topic like biology or philosophy or whatever, different topics. They bring in lecturers, they bring in music, and it's, highbrow education, kind of also vacation on this beautiful lake, which is Lake Chautauqua. So that's what started it. And then people couldn't all go to New York, so some towns would start their own Chautauquas. Like there's still one in Wichita Falls, Kansas. There's still one in Boulder, but they were all over, where they would bring the entertainers to their town for over the summer. And then that evolved into what's called the Chautauqua circuits. And it was all started. It's actually not sanctioned by the Chautauqua Institute, interestingly.
Okay.
There were over thousands of different Chautauqua circuits, and they were started either by entrepreneurial business people or universities, and they would book lecturers, highbrow music, and theater people to travel from town to town. And the townspeople would buy season tickets in advance. So that's how they kind of got themselves going. And I read several newspaper articles or little memory type notes where people were just so excited. The whole summer they were looking forward to Chautauqua coming to their little rural town. And basically the town would shut down for either 3 to 5 days, and they'd have all these entertainers come in, and they were bringing music, lectures, and theater to the rural town. And the whole idea was to educate America. And so in my mind, it's like the forerunner to TED Talks,
Yeah.
Kind of the same idea, right? We have all this information, we want to share it with as many people as we can. So it was
Yeah.
that same type of thing. But they like in 1924, that was probably the height of the Chautauqua circuits. There were over 10,000 different Chautauquas in different towns, and they
Wow.
say they reached like 40,000, I mean, sorry, 40 million people. So indirectly, we've probably all been influenced by Chautauqua in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like YouTube, except YouTube coming to
Exactly.
you because music and
Yeah.
education
Yeah.
and different kinds of entertainment.
Right.
Yeah.
And the reason they're not known really anymore, well, one is I think it's just a part of history that isn't in our textbooks for whatever reason. But also they by the 1930s they really kind of died down, and it was mostly because of the invention of the radio, because
Hmm.
now people didn't have to go to these tent, shows. They could
Right.
hear on the radio all year long. And then the Depression,
Yeah.
kind of helped put an end to it. So, but I just found it fascinating. One, that I didn't know about it, and it influenced so many people. And then two, that my grandmother was a part of it, because
Yeah.
she was in the versatile quintet, which is also the quintet's name in my book. She was in her version of the versatile quintet for 3 summers.
Wow.
So, she was very involved, and she whistled and played trombone. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, people say to me, musical people say, why was the versatile quintet a trombone, a violin, a banjo, a harp, and a piano player?
Right.
And I just say, well, that's what my grandmother's was. For
Yeah.
whatever reason, they put that together, and that's what they did.
Yeah. Yeah. It is interesting, but I mean, hey.
It worked for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fascinating. So the
Yeah.
main character is Bertha, but she goes by Birdie, which is appropriate since she can
Yes.
whistle bird calls perfectly.
Yeah.
What about Birdie do you think will resonate with readers?
Oh, I think, in my mind, they will all root for her because she's a likable, somewhat reliable narrator. And she's also the kind of person who's a little bit naive and like
Hmm.
kind of figuring things out. And she, through the course of the summer and through her friendships that she's made and through the travel, she just really grows into a different person than she started out.
Yeah.
Um, but she's likable and, very positive most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, positive, but like at the beginning of the tour, she's not quite sure how to read people. Are they making fun of her? Are they being like
Right,
it's as many of us can be very sort of narcissistic, like, are you making fun of me or was that about me?
right.
Or, and she's
Yeah,
19. So
yeah, yeah, yeah. And hopefully she's someone that there's at least something in her that they can resonate with or identify to. Because,
yeah.
like, I wrote this during a period of my life where I went through some pretty big life changes. Well, when my mom died, I got a divorce, I moved to a different state. And
Yeah.
so I was kind of going through my own coming of age. It was just later in life.
Yeah.
But I could relate to a lot of what Bertie was going through
Yeah.
too, even though I'm older and all that stuff, not quite as naive.
Right, right. But I think we have coming of age moments at lots of different points in our life because
Right,
our
right.
lives aren't stagnant.
Exactly, exactly. And it's good. It's good for all of us to keep learning and keep being curious and trying new things and
Yeah.
everything. Yeah, yeah.
You had your grandmother as a template, we'll say, for Birdie, but in terms of character development, how does that work for you as a writer? Do you like to have a really good understanding of each character before you start writing? Do you prefer that they evolve as you write?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've only have one book, so my second one that I'm working on is going to be a little different. But I love strong character books. Like, to me, the characters are the most important, and then the plot grows out of that. So that's
Hmm.
how I wrote this. And like I said, my first attempt was pretty weak. And my characters just weren't developed well. So that's what I learned in one of my first workshops, is to go back, and I use character development sheets, and I've kind of devised my own But I want to know as much about that character as I can, and probably a lot of it doesn't actually get in the book,
Hmm.
but I need to understand, how they would react to a certain thing or how they, would act or what they think, those what's important to them, what's their hit backstory, all that, even if it doesn't go in the book. And so I did character development sheets for all my main characters, Birdie, the other four women in the versatile quintet, Hugo, like, the different characters, Lydia, the ones that were pretty influential in the story because
Hmm.
I needed to know them. And like my versatile quintet, I first didn't do character development on them, but when I had a pretty good storyline going, my writer's critique group were like, Melora, we're having trouble telling the difference between the five women. We know who Birdie is, and then
Hmm.
Flo is a pretty outspoken
Yeah.
character, but the other ones are getting all muddled. And so one of my writer friends said, you really need to write the same exact scene from each of the five different points of view.
Mm.
And my story is written in close third from Birdie's point of view.
Yeah.
So I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. That's a waste of time. It won't go in my book.
Yeah.
And he just kept persisting, and I did it. I spent a good week writing the same scene from the five different points of view. And from then on, writing my characters, the versatile quintet characters, in groups or small groups, I could write it so much better. And because I determined where they were coming from, what's their backstory, I determined what their what they thought their goal was, so I could write it so much better. It was some of the
Yeah.
best advice I'd ever gotten. And I kind of feel a little sheepish that I at first resisted.
I've been there, yeah, it sounds great, but I don't want to do it. And then you do it and you're like, okay,
Yeah,
fine, it
yeah,
worked.
yeah,
Um,
exactly. Learn something really important.
don't you just hate it when people are right? You don't listen to them because you think, yeah, that sounds okay, but do I want to do it that way? And then you try it and, oh, okay, I see the value in that. I can often be stubborn about trying something, even though it sounds good. And I think, yeah, that I could see how that would be helpful. And then I don't try it. That's just my stubborn personality, I guess. But let's go ahead and take our second break of this episode. When we come back, we'll still be talking about character development, but how that is looking as she's working on her second novel. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Melora Fern. Before the break, we were talking about character development and how a writer friend gave her the advice of trying to write, even though it's a one point of view book, but trying to write from some of those other points of view of the versatile quintet, just to get into the heads of those characters a little bit better. And she put it off, but then tried it, and it actually worked out very nicely. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Melora.
Now that I'm writing a second book, I've spent a lot of time developing all the characters that I think are going to be in it first.
Mm-hmm.
And then the writings come a lot easier because I know these characters well. Because I'm not really a plotter. You know how there's plotters and pantsers?
Yep.
I'm very much a pantser.
Yeah.
I have an idea where it's going to go, but the more and the better I get to know my characters, they really do take me along.
Yeah.
People say that's kind of goofy because I know the characters are in my head and it's my head, but once you get to know them, they really do. You can't force a certain plot if it's not right for that character. So
yeah, you're not alone. Most of the authors I talk to say that their characters are very strong-willed.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is good, I think, because then the story to me is more passionate and more heartfelt and everything because it's from a character. And if your character is well-rounded, it makes it, more authentic and
Yeah.
everything. Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned the diversity of the instruments in the versatile quintet, and a lot of the chapters will center on those musical performances. So,
Mhm.
how do you go about writing a musical performance so that the reader feels like they're actually there hearing that performance?
Yeah. Again, just one, sharing it with my writer's critique group. But I was in band as a kid. I'm a
Hmm.
band nerd. So I definitely know performing. And my mom was, she majored in music, so she was a beautiful singer. Um, so I think I have the basics of music and then just a lot of research on the internet or like YouTube, watching a trombone player.
Hmm.
So how they hold the instrument and all that kind of thing. And then the music that I chose is all from, I found there's several books out about the Chautauqua circuits, but there's one that listed, what music was being played, what was popular at the time. And it
Hmm.
wasn't, they didn't play jazz, which was coming up in the 1920s. They
Right.
considered that as not, highbrow enough. So it was much
Hmm.
more classical music and stuff like that,
Yeah.
patriotic music. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, to me, it was very important to have it be as correct as possible.
Hmm.
So I spent a lot of time researching the musicians and the music and, the performances of the time.
Yeah. One small detail, but important because Birdie does play the trombone, is emptying her spit valve,
Yes.
which I was a flute player in band, and I sat in front of the brass, and they were constantly emptying.
Yes. That's funny. I was a flute player too. Yeah, my brother played trombone. Yeah, and like the first line of my book has her doing that, and
Yeah.
the editor with my publisher did not like that. She goes, "That's just gross." And I said, "Well,
But
to me, it sets Birdie doesn't see it as gross. It's
no,
just
and it has to be
natural,
done.
But at the time, it wasn't considered feminine or,
Right.
proper at all. So I
Right.
felt like that first sentence kind of set the conflict in one sentence. Here's
Yeah,
this
it's
woman
completely
emptying a
appropriate.
spit valve. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And the trombone has always been a mystery to me. Like it just seems like I don't know, magic the way they know where to put the slide. I don't even, I've never tried, but
Yeah.
it's always seemed amazing that they,
Yes. No, I agree. I agree. Yeah. Yeah,
so,
my uncle actually played trombone and my brother did and his son did. And when we got married, my uncle arranged a trombone trio for Holy, 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 which
oh,
probably isn't
interesting.
played at many weddings.
Yeah. Well, probably not on the trombone for sure.
Yeah.
Fun though. That's,
Yeah, very fun. And at
yeah,
that time, I had no idea that my grandmother played trombone too. I'd never,
yeah,
I found this photograph of her holding the trombone. It just blew me away.
yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, my family is similar. Like the older generations just never talked about a lot of things. So who knows what they had full lives before we ever
right,
knew them, but I don't
right.
always know much about it.
I know. I think we all need to, we need to be asking our elders a lot more questions than we do, and just because
Yeah.
everyone has a story, I believe, and they're really fascinating.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, why was it important for you to focus and highlight those female friendships, especially during this era?
Yeah, so the 1920s, turns out was such a great era to write a coming of age novel because
Yeah.
all of the world was coming of age in a
Yeah.
way because it was after the Great War or World War One, and then after the Spanish flu epidemic. So
Yeah.
people had been beaten down and, lost a lot of hope. And then through the 1920s, prosperity was hitting everyone pretty much, and people just kind of let loose and had a lot more freedoms, especially women. They had
Hmm.
gotten the right to vote. There was just all this exciting change going on. Like I said, the tumultuous 1920s, and
Yeah.
a lot of stories that we hear, like The Great Gatsby, or other stories that are written in the 20s, kind of show the urban or the jazz age or the flappers.
Yeah.
And what I found out from my research is a lot of women, might be reading about that in magazines or know about it, but the majority of the quote unquote, normal American women weren't flappers, and they weren't going to jazz and speakeasies. So I wanted to write about the more more everyday woman, and friendships were just so important for women. So, and for me, like for my life change, I knew I had to make friends wherever I moved, and I couldn't do it through my ex-husband. I couldn't do it through my kids. So finding common interest or finding each other, is so important. So I really had fun with the friendships, because not all friendships go exactly like you want them to, or that you think they should go.
Yeah.
And you travel together, you learn a lot about people, especially when you're rooming together. So I wanted to kind of write all that in there.
And
I really had fun with it. Yeah.
Sometimes it's the relationship that like the person that you like the least at first, maybe you eventually get that deep connection with it. You never know.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. And like in my book, Adele is kind of tight-lipped and a little hard to be around. And Birdie really wants to know why. And Adele just doesn't want to share it with her. And that was another thing that I kind of had to say to my editor. She wanted me to resolve that. And I was like, no, over a summer, you don't always learn everything you want about a friend. And, I think it's important to show that it's still okay to know someone and travel with them. And they might turn out to be a better friend than you think, even though you don't know their whole backstory.
Right.
Because for me, life is never tied up with a bow. So I didn't want my story over the course of one summer to be tied up with a bow.
Right.
Because it's more true.
But
sitcoms in an hour.
Yeah. Melora said, life is never tied up in a bow. Sometimes maybe things get tied up nicely, but a lot of times things do not get tied up in a nice, neat little bow. And so she said, why does every character have to do that? Especially one that is, if this was a multiple point of view book, maybe, but in this case, why did that storyline have to be tied up nice and neat? And so my question for you as we go into this next break is, do you prefer your books to not be like life, in that you like everything tied up in a nice, neat little bow? Or do you like a little bit of ambiguity, a little bit of mystery in your books? It depends on the book for me. I can go either way, but I'm curious what you think. But we are going to take our next break of this podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking more about that spectrum of life in the 20s and how it wasn't always how we maybe envision it, or how it's portrayed in terms of what I said at the beginning, flappers and prohibition and speakeasies, etc. You are tuned into the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Melora Fern. Before the break, we were talking about life not always being tied up in a nice, neat bow, books not always being tied up in a nice, neat bow. And what do you think about that? How do you feel about that in terms of your book plots? Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Melora. When I think of the 20s, it's always amazing to me to look at fashion because hemlines and haircuts went from, they both shortened immensely. So it
Exactly.
makes much more sense to think of it as you were just saying, not every woman immediately went from ankle length to above her knees or bobbed her
Right.
hair. There was a lot more of a spectrum on that.
Right. Right. Yeah. And fashion was one way that they could, but they didn't, like you said, they didn't take it all at once.
Yeah.
They weren't suddenly in sequins and swinging pearls.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
might have, a drop waist dress, or they might actually get a cloche hat, but they didn't do
Right.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe
Yeah.
maybe calf length, you're
Right.
a little bit at a time.
Yeah.
Um, obviously you had to do a lot of research for this, especially with the Chautauqua circuit and everything, but is there anything specific that like was surprising to you or really stood out for you in terms of research?
Well, I think the 1920s, just what we were just talking about, that was surprising to me that because I just only knew about speakeasies and gin,
Yeah.
and so that was fun to learn. And then, I spent a lot of time researching, not only on the internet, but I went to Swarthmore College, and that's where my grandmother had done her Chautauqua was at a Swarthmore College. And I found just so much information about the Chautauqua circuit and just the complexity of how they had like A, B, and C, different circuits running at the same time, how they got the tents there, how just the complexity of these
Yeah.
circuits just blew me away. And
Yeah.
they had boxes of information from their circuit that was so helpful, like the train schedules. So
Hmm.
my people followed the same train schedule, which made no
Yeah.
sense. They're not like in a straight line, stop to stop. They're all over the place. And the reason was because they could only go to towns where they had sold tickets ahead of time
Yeah.
and had enough money to support them. So
Yeah.
that part was fascinating to me. And I went down many, many rabbit holes.
Yes. And they did it all without the internet, without everyone
Exactly.
having a phone, access to a phone.
Exactly. Yeah. On
Yeah.
train, they were relying on train schedules.
Yeah.
Trains ran late sometimes or
Yep.
didn't show, or, it's just fascinating to me.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So is that part of what draws you to writing historical fiction? I mean, obviously this book came about in some very specific ways, but do you want to
Yeah.
continue writing historical fiction?
Yes. Yeah. I just think there are so many untold stories in our history, and I just think I'd like to share more about them, what I've learned. And because in doing my stories research, I found out about some other things that really piqued my interest. So yeah, I think historical fiction is my genre right now. I really like writing about it, and I love researching. I didn't know how much I would love it, but I do. And
Yeah.
it's funny how you can spend a day and a half, learning. Like I learned all about the Philadelphia train station, and in 1924, when Birdie goes there in my novel, they were going through renovations, and it was like the thing of the times. And but I couldn't put all that in my book. I tried, and my writer's critique group was like, "Yeah, no, we don't really care about that.
Right.
We don't want a page and a half about the Philadelphia Broad Street
But
station."
you're like, it's fascinating. You need to know about this.
Exactly. Yeah. So all that research, went to about two sentences.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing with research. It's like the iceberg, right?
Yeah,
Well,
because you learn you can't info dump, but people don't want to hear that usually. So you want to figure it in to your story world or your setting or your character development, but it all needs to have a purpose.
yeah.
What you're teaching people or what you're telling them or showing them to move the story along.
It's a fine line between info dumping and making sure things are accurate because on the other end of the spectrum, you're going to get the person who notices that detail that you got wrong and is mad about
Yeah.
it.
I know that's my one fear that someone will say, "Well, I lived in Picton and you didn't describe it right," or
Right,
something.
exactly. Exactly.
I used maps a lot and photographs. There's so many. We're so lucky. There's so many good resources out there.
Yeah.
Because when I had the train go to a town, I wanted it to be as accurate as possible that they really did arrive at this train station on Main Street or whatever, and they would turn left because that's where the boarding houses were or whatever. I wanted it, if they walked by a building, I wanted it to be accurate if that building would have really been there or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
you mentioned that you are working on a second book, which is exciting. Is there anything that you can or want to say about that book at this point?
Oh, sure. I'm writing it about, it's a different thing for me, but anyways, I'm writing it about Agnes Woodward, who I discovered in my writing my first one, and she was a real woman who was an opera singer in Detroit at 1900s, 1902 and 3. And then she abused her voice so much that she couldn't sing anymore. And so she pivoted and started whistling. And she moved to California in LA, and she started a whistling school for young women. And I just have found her fascinating. So in the early 1900s, she started this whistling school, which I'm really not sure how she did it logistically, because most women couldn't own a business at the time, and her father had died, and as far as I can tell, there was no man in her life.
Right.
But she started this school, and she trained women to whistle for like the Chautauquas or vaudeville. She trained a lot of women to whistle for the movie studios. Like all the whistlers for Walt Disney were trained by her.
Wow.
They're all women whistlers. Anytime Mickey Mouse whistled or Snow White or whatever. So her goal or her mission was to empower women in the early 1900s to be self-supporting. And she never married. She lived with her mom, her two spinster aunts who seemed like quite the characters. So I did a lot of research finding out about her. She wrote this book called The Art of Whistling, which my grandmother used. And she actually did correspondence whistling courses in the 1920s, which I'm like, how did that work?
Yeah.
You know, did they whistle over the phone or... So I've done quite a bit of research on her, but there's just many holes. So I feel like it's a great opportunity for historical fiction, because I can, again, stay authentic and true to kind of her story, but also use my creative imagination to kind of build in the color and the, interesting things. And
you're going to be an expert on whistling, kind of a niche topic, but you're going to know.
I know. I was interviewed by this newspaper, and the interviewer was like, well, you've written about whistling now. I'm sure you've moved on to something else. And I was like, actually, my next book's even more about whistling.
Right. Which reminds me, I meant to ask you about whistling women and crowing hens is a line that Lydia says to Birdie, and Birdie often thinks about. So where does that phrase come from?
So actually, I did a lot of research on that, and I found out there's different variations of it, but it actually started in like the late 1600s. In Ireland and all over Europe. They just said, whistle, women who whistle, the devil will come. Like they felt like women who whistled were, that was very improper.
Of course.
And so in America, it kind of moved to, there's different variations, and it was definitely in the South, proper women didn't whistle. So they would say, whistling women and crowing hens never come to a good end. And Agnes Woodward actually changed it, changed the saying. And but the title, it wasn't that title for the first like 6 years or so, but one of my writer critique friends, I was on a walk with her, and we met her neighbor, who was just the epitome of Southern charm. And she said, oh, what are you writing? And I told her about, this young woman who uses whistling to escape her overbearing sister. She immediately said, whistling women and crowing hens never comes to a good end. She goes, I would never whistle myself, so, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's my title. I just loved it.
Yeah. Wow.
It's a mouthful though. You have to.
Yeah. Even though I know it, I always look at it to make sure I'm getting the words in the right order. Wow. So that to me is really interesting, that this was not the title of the book for the first 6 years. When you read the book and you encounter that title, that phrase very quickly in the book, then it makes so much sense. And this is not a phrase that I don't think I'd ever heard this phrase before reading the book, but I mean, it's not surprising. Women aren't supposed to do all kinds of things for all kinds of random reasons throughout history, right? So heaven forbid a woman should whistle. But Anyway, we're going to go ahead and take our last break of this episode. When we come back, more about that path to publication for Melora. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my conversation with author Melora Fern. Before the break, we were talking about the title and the process of getting the perfect title for this book. Let's go ahead and return to that conversation with Melora. So you came to writing a little later in life, maybe than some people do. Was it specifically this story that pushed you to write, or had you wanted to write before this?
No, I had wanted to write before, and I tried. I actually went to a writing workshop in North Texas, and I wrote like a memoir, a little bit about my daughter and me, kind of mother-daughter changing relationship, and just got slammed in the workshop. Like where it was a big table, and they went around and critiqued everybody's work, and it wasn't a positive environment. It was just everybody was trying to one up each other, and
Yeah.
they told me I was a Pollyanna. They told me nobody lived a life like that. It was very critical. So I quit. I just said, this is for me. And then at that time, my kids were in high school, and they had a literary festival at their high school, and I got to meet I got involved as a volunteer and got to meet like Tobias Wolff, Marcus Zuzak, some really cool authors. And talking with them, like I was the person who would pick them up from the airport and drive, drive them around.
Wow.
And talking to them, they're like, don't listen to that. Was a bad experience. Don't let that stop you. And I never shared any of my writing with them, but they encouraged me to try again. And then it was about a year or so later that I found this stuff, and stories were in my head. When I walk, especially in the evening, you see a scene in a house or, in a front yard, and a story just pops in my head about those people. So I've always told myself stories, just never writing them.
Yeah.
And I did learn, you have to, like anything, you have to hone the craft, and, you have to read craft books. You have to read a lot to not mimic or copy other writers, but learn how to write well. Like I read so differently now that I've taken writing workshops and writing classes, because, like I know how important the first chapter is. And so I often, after I finish a book, I'll reread the first chapter and compare it to the last chapter. And, you can just always learn from other writers. And I don't think, I'm not criticizing that, some people are just natural bestseller writers, right? Like I'm not at that level, but I do feel like anybody, if they spent the time, could really learn the craft of writing. And it's really not the first draft writing, it's the 110th draft that you've rewritten, and you have to be able to take feedback. I wouldn't have a novel without my writers critique group, and we meet weekly and share about 500 to 600 words, and they just really helped me get it to be a better story. And that's what I wanted. I want the critique because I feel like I can always be better.
Yeah. Thank you. And you mentioned that you are an avid reader as well. So who are some of your go-to authors when you read just for you?
Well, now, like I wouldn't say this 10 years ago, but I love historical fiction authors. So like Kate Quinn is probably one of my top ones. I love Anne Patchett. As more current writers. I'm trying to think of what else I've been reading. Well, like James by Everett Percival, the story of Huckleberry Finn from Jim the Slave's point of view, just phenomenal writing. So I try to be open-minded. I'm in a couple of book clubs, which is really good because it gets me out of my rut of only reading historical fiction. There's so many good books out there. And it gets me to reading different genres because I just feel like when you read a book that really captures you, it doesn't have to be a certain genre. It's just really good writing or really strong characters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. If people want to know more about this book, website, and any social media that you're active on.
Yeah, I have a website, melorafern.com, and on that lists all, I write twice a month I write a blog, and it's just kind of as I say, my yammerings about my life and writing and everything. And then I'm on Instagram most frequently under Melora Fern and Facebook.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Melora, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you wanted to make sure you highlighted during this time?
Not that I can think of. I feel like we covered a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk to me about writing and the book. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for interviewing me. And I just hope people enjoy reading the book as much as I enjoyed writing it.
Thank you again to Melora for joining me to talk about the book, to talk about the writing of the book. I love that she wrote it to honor her grandmother, maybe not completely exactly her grandmother's life, but a lot of the details from her grandmother's life. And I think that's wonderful. And I think it's wonderful that she was able to learn not only about her grandmother's life, but about a period of history that she maybe didn't know very much about. And I wonder what's in my own family history that I don't know about. But if you're a fan of historical fiction, if you are a fan of books that have ties to the author's real family, whether they're fiction or fictionalized or not, this is one that you will definitely want to check out. And if you've never heard of the Chautauqua Circuit and want to learn more, I mean, it really is fascinating to learn more about it and just the undertaking of what went into making that work, because it was quite the huge operation at one point. And like we said in the interview, no phones, well, some phones, but no internet, no texting, no email, all the ways that we coordinate things now. Things had to be coordinated in much slower ways. So whoever was organizing everything had to be incredibly organized and working with a very large network of people. But if you're interested in those somewhat maybe hidden pieces of history that maybe you have heard of it, but maybe you haven't, then this is really a great book to check out. And also, if you like coming of age stories and stories with very strong, very central female relationships and how those relationships play out, especially in community, because really female friendships, relationships, etc., take on a slightly different intensity when you are in a close relationship or community like this, traveling together very brief period of time. Those friendships can be sometimes unique, sometimes complicated, sometimes amazing. So check out the book for any of those reasons, but definitely look into this if it is something that you are interested in. And thank you again to Melora for joining me. Thank you, of course, as always, for joining me for this episode. And I hope that you will join me for the next interview. We are sticking with historical fiction, but this time we're in the 90s. When is that cutoff? I know I've asked this before, but when is the cutoff for historical fiction? But we are in the 90s. This book is Scab Muggers. It is actually a novella length, I think. Well, I'll ask Yvonne if she considers it to be novella length. It is shorter, it makes it an easy read, but this is about a group of organizers who are spending time taking a course at Harvard. And for me, it's fascinating just to watch the dynamics of this group play out, because they're very diverse. They're from different countries, they're from different backgrounds, they're from different experiences. And as I was saying, life and community, it's going to intensify and ramp up relationships. That is absolutely the case here. And so I'm looking forward to speaking with Yvonne and hope that you will join me for that conversation. But in the meantime, of course, if you haven't done so already, please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you are either listening to or watching the episode on. It helps the algorithm. You can also leave a nice review. A positive review is incredibly helpful to continue getting this podcast out to more people who love books as much as we do. You can also follow the podcast on social media: Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Love hearing from you, so come check out social media, whatever platform you're on. Find the podcast and me on that platform and hit me up with your questions, comments, which interviews you've heard, etc., etc., or etc., as Yul Brynner would say. I had one more etc. to get in there for that King and I reference. I hope you're having a great week. I hope you remember what day it is and your memory is doing better than mine is this week. But whatever's going on in your week, whether it's busy, whether your memory is failing, I hope it gives you plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you so much. I will talk to you next time.